Hey, somebody needs to say the blessing. You have? Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. You are listening to The Professional Noticer. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Andrews. Hey, thank you for making me a part of your week. My purpose here today, and with every show we do, is to play the part of a best friend or a coach. I want to help you live the life of your wildest dreams by giving you access to the greatest mentors the world has to offer today. Our sponsor this week is itam.org. That's IAITAM.org. They're the only global member-based training organization dedicated to meeting the needs of IT asset management professionals. This is an unbelievable organization. Dr. Barbara Mbiasa is somebody you should know. I mean, look her up. Dr. Barb actually created not this business, this industry, okay? And ITAM, again, is the only global training organization turning out IT asset managers that corporations immediately hire all over the world. So check them out. You can go to school on this with an online program and get a degree that's in huge demand. You want to know what companies depend on ITAM to train their asset managers? Go to IAITAM.org and look through their client list. I'm telling you, it's everybody from Sony Pictures to NASA to the United Nations, Facebook, Yahoo, Google. I mean, it's hilarious to me that Google is one of their clients. Microsoft, Apple, these people have IT issues, I guess, and they hire the people that ITAM has trained. That's IAITAM.org. All right, observations and answers are what we do here on The Professional Noticer. And as you know, we love it when somebody comes to the table with observations and answers. And today, we have a guest that my wife was aggravated that I was having this guest because she is out of town and couldn't come see him because he is her favorite. We have an author. I mean, to call this guy an author is kind of odd to me because he's done so many different things, but he's done them all at just a huge high level. He's a boat captain, a guide, an adventure guide, an explorer. I could come up with a lot of descriptions for you, Ben. Please welcome Ben Raines.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
Buddy, I'm glad you're here. And you know, I told the staff at the studio last week, I said, it's time to have Ben Raines again. And they said, okay, so what do you want to talk about? I said, I don't care. Because the podcast that Ben was on was one of the most popular we've ever had. And every time you and I are together, I feel like we just kind of keep talking. I mean, we had to stop in here and say, okay, come on, turn on this camera. We got to get going. But I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you. I think a conversation is that way with a professional noticer who notices everything, and I kind of have a little of that trait myself.
Oh yeah, you have a lot of it. Now you on a daily basis, besides writing, tell me about, because this is how I found you, because my wife hired you with her buddies. Tell me about that part of your life.
So that's my sort of nature guide thing, where we live here in the Mobile area, South Alabama, on the edge of one of the biggest wilderness areas in America, which is the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. And so that book you're holding, I named it America's Amazon. And I have been taking people out there now for 10 years, as a charter captain. And we go, these are like hardcore backcountry adventures where we're catching stuff in nets, we're getting out, we're walking through the swamp, dodging snakes. And I constantly have people say, I've never done anything like this in my life. And that is so fun. And, to take people out there who've been fishing in this area all their lives and show them things that are right under their noses they've never seen before.
Right.
I just love it. It's
well, Polly and her friends, I mean, they've booked you, I think, three times. And,
more than that.
And she told me, she says, we've got another one going in May. And so I'm like, all right, well, do I get to go? She said, if there's room, you can go. I'm like, okay, good. I'm going to have to just Ben and I got to do something together. But man, she has told me about you guys getting out of the boat and trudging through the mud with your boots and going to some monster cypress tree.
I covered this area as a reporter for the local newspaper for 20 years. I was the environment reporter. And so that put me out there all the time. And I was always in the company of scientists, and I would pick their brains and learn what they learned. And I just ended up with this sort of kind of giant but useless for any other purpose body of knowledge.
Yeah.
And my mom, she's come and gone on a few trips with me. And she says, don't you get tired doing this so often, taking these people out there for 6 hours at a time and telling them about the same things you see? And I say, no, Mom, never. I never get bored doing that. I got bored sitting in a newsroom in a cubicle for 20 years.
Right.
But being outside in nature, it's just like, it's kid in a candy store kind of thing.
Yeah, and seeing somebody's eyes light up when you're showing them something they had not ever seen.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this. There's so much of what you do that I want to talk about, but I want to go ahead and tag the elephant in the room and make sure that people are connecting you with what they might think if they remember the last interview. But Ben Raines is the guy who found the Clotilda. And the Clotilda is the last slave ship that ever brought slaves into the United States. And this has been lost for 160 years. People have been looking for it for 160 years. And Ben found it. And the book about that is one of the best books I've ever read. It's called The Last Slave Ship. And if you haven't already gotten this, I know you've heard me talk about it before, but if for whatever reason you haven't gotten it, get two when you buy it, because you're going to want to give one away. So just a great book. So tell me, just if you don't mind going over that again for people, just about the history of the Clotilda, and you find it. This is fascinating to me.
Well, so the Clotilda was, as you said, the last ship to bring enslaved people in. And it did that in 1860 when it was already illegal. The international slave trade had been outlawed in America since 1808.
Right.
And so it was a crime.
So people could have slaves, they just couldn't bring them in anymore.
From other countries, right. They had to be born into slavery in America, basically, at that point.
How fortunate.
So these guys in Mobile decided to bring some in, mainly to thumb their nose at the federal government. It's 1860. We're on the eve of the Civil War. And so there's a local steamboat captain named Timothy Mayer who is, by today's standards, he would have hundreds of millions of dollars. He was one of the wealthiest people in Alabama. So he hired this ship and sent it. He spent about $1 million in today's money to send this ship to Africa, buy a load of enslaved people and bring them back. And he only did it to win a bet that he had made. So that's why this is the last ship. But it was illegal, and the government was looking for him because he had bragged about it so much while the ship was sailing to Africa. Hey, look what I'm doing. And so the federal government was literally watching him at his house.
All right.
So when the ship came back, they realized they had to burn it, to destroy it, to try and hide it. And they hid it up in this giant swamp, the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. And so, as a reporter, I'd written so much about it and everything, and I'd made a documentary about the Delta called America's Amazon. And so one day a friend of mine called me and told me to look for the Clotilda. And, my first words to him, I said, is it missing? Because I didn't understand the story.
Yeah, because he said, hey, your next big deal, you're going to find the Clotilda.
Right.
You're like, what is that?
I didn't know they had burned it. I just knew the last ship had come in here. I didn't know the whole backstory about it being illegal and all. So part of his reasoning for telling me to look for it was that I had been covering the Delta for so long. He's like, you're up there all the time. You take people on these trips. You know that place backward and forward. I think you could find it. And so that was, I told him it was ridiculous. And we hung up the phone, and I immediately typed Clotilda into Google and was hooked instantly. I'd ordered all the books. They were all coming. So, it took quite a while to find. And there were a few missteps along the way, finding the wrong ship, and, which was embarrassing on a global scale.
Oh, my gosh.
But the finding the actual ship, ultimately I found it. I was in a wetsuit in the water finding the carcass, but I really found it in the library in all these old historical documents. And that was a really, that part of the process as like a person hunting for something is, the research that goes into it. And then afterward, once you've accomplished something, you look back and you think, huh. And I know you've felt some of that with your book, The Heartmender, with the artifacts you found. It was kind of the reverse story. You found the artifacts and had to figure out what they were.
They were, yeah.
But it's the same treasure hunt.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interviewing and research and it's all those things you notice and you put together and it's cool to see something come together like that, you know.
Was there any backlash do you find in it?
Yes. There have been two people, but they were kind of on different spectrums. One was a lifelong friend of the descendants of the Mayer family who paid for the thing, you know, the villains of the story.
All right.
And I'd known him for decades and had done many adventures with him. He's an older guy. He's older than I am. He's about 80. But he grew up with them. And when I started looking for the ship, he told me I should quit and let sleeping dogs lie. And it kind of ruined our friendship. And we've healed it now, but for a long time, he was going around town bad-mouthing me, saying I was ruining the Mayer family descendants' retirements by looking for the ship. And then the other side was one of the descendants who, you know, for the most part, the descendants of the people who were on the Clotilda, you know, that when they were only slaves for 5 years. And when they were freed, they settled in a place called Africatown. They made a community, an African village. They bought the land from the people who'd enslaved them and built this little town. So we know where many, many of the descendants of the 110 people who were on the Clotilda are today.
I drive by there and I see that chimney. Right
Exactly. They built that, you know, with their own hands. And it's not protected in any way. It's just sitting there. And it's just scandalous. If that were in another state, there would be a fence around it. There would be a plaque telling you what it was. But, you know, we fall down over and over in Alabama with all kinds of treasures. You know, natural treasures like the big swamp. You know, we have the most lax pollution control laws in the country. We spend less to protect the environment than any other state. Similarly, we have these historical artifacts like the Clotilda, which is an internationally important shipwreck.
Yeah.
And it is still.
I mean, when you found that news went around the world.
Mm-hmm. And here we are coming up on the 5th anniversary of the discovery of the only American slave ship ever found. You know, they've only found about 7 or 8 slave ships globally. And most of those were found in the ports where they sank. Not, you know, they weren't the last slave ship. There were about 20,000 ships that carried enslaved people around the world. And so we found 7. And the only American one is sitting here in Alabama, and we know where it is. We're coming up on the 5th anniversary of when I discovered it. And we have not dug it up. We have not preserved it. We are busily preserving Confederate ships and artifacts. And here is this, you know, incredible thing. And it's still sitting there. So frustration. But that's kind of,
yeah, you know, I share in your frustration. What
it would be a globally important tourist attraction, you know, to put it in Africatown, in that town.
Yes.
So what I was talking about, though, was one of the descendants said he didn't want the ship dug up. And I was stunned. And I said, why not? And he said, I think the ship will take the attention away from the people who were on it in terms of a museum or something. And
I don't.
I don't either. I think it is the vehicle to tell the story.
Yeah,
of the people.
I think once you lay your hand on that ship and look there, and you can start visualizing what it would have been like to sit there as that thing came across the ocean. I think it totally links it, not takes from it.
I'm you know, people go see the motel where Martin Luther King was shot.
Right.
You know, and the ship would be like that, you know. There's a lot of work to be done in Alabama on many, many fronts in terms of bringing the state and our officials up to the level in other states. And I'm an Alabama native, and I hate to say that, but you can see it everywhere in all sorts of things. You drive around the roads, and you see people throwing garbage out their windows, and we are in the most diverse state in America. And that's what people don't realize. They see Alabama as, you know, cotton fields and steel mills and civil rights protests and football, although Georgia's taken that away from us right now. They see Alabama for these things we've done to Alabama and in Alabama. They don't see it for what it is, which is the state with more species per square mile than any other state in America.
Really?
Absolutely. More than twice as many per square mile. Alabama leads in all kinds of categories of creatures, particularly the aquatic creatures. We have more species of fish than any other state by hundreds of species. Alabama has 450 species of fish. California has 110. Alabama has 97 species of crawfish. California has 9. The state of Washington, which is home to the second biggest river system in America, has 1 crawfish species. We have 97. So we're the leader in all these things, but we're the leader in something else, too, in Alabama, which is a leader in extinctions. More than half of all U.S. extinctions since the 1850s happened in Alabama. And these are stunning facts, both the good ones and the bad ones. And, we're at this moment where we've got to step up our game, or you're not going to be the leader in species. You can't be the leader in extinctions and the leader in species forever. They're
Right, yeah.
So these are the things that keep me up at night, is trying to figure out how to communicate these things to people to make them care and make them see where we are for what it is. And it's a spectacular place.
I've told people for years, because I'm always shocked at the people who have never been to Alabama. We did that thing over at the Grand Hotel where those people were from all over the country, and we were speaking at the same event, and those people were from all over the country, and it was the historical hotels meeting there at the Grand Hotel. And do you know that except for about 10 of those people, none of them had ever been in Alabama?
And you know that as we were sitting there on the edge of Mobile Bay at the hotel, a few miles north of the Gulf of Mexico, I had somebody from one of the hotels at the convention say, I had no idea Alabama had a coastline.
See, I've told people for years that I could set you down in many places in this state, and the last thing you would think is Alabama, whatever you think of, because Alabama has mountains. Mm-hmm. We got white beaches. White sand beaches. We got the lakes. There's just so much here.
We have more miles of streams and rivers than any other state.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And you think of how big Texas is, or California. Texas is 5 times bigger than Alabama. California's 3 times bigger. But think how dry they are. That's actually the key to our diversity, is our latitude. We're right here where we are sitting right here in Orange Beach. We're on the same latitude as Cairo, as the Sahara Desert. And that's a stunning thing to process. And in the summertime, when it's beating down, the sun's, burns you in seconds, you can see the connection. But here it rains so much, and that's because of the Gulf of Mexico. So we would be in this horrid desert if it weren't for all the rain. We're the rainiest spot in the United States.
Yeah, for the past 3 years, we've had more rain than Seattle.
Yeah, well, every year we do. Seattle has about 55 inches a year. We have 70 to 75. So we're like a greenhouse, though. You've got plentiful sun, plentiful water. That's what it takes to grow plants. And hence we have more species than all these other places. It's kind of a cool,
Sheesh, what is, have you ever seen something like done a double take in the swamp and then go over and go, oh my God, that's a so-and-so?
Yes, quite a few times. In fact, I found 2 creatures that were thought to be extinct.
Really?
And the first one was a pipefish, a seahorse relative,
right,
long, skinny fish like a pencil. And this one
put them in our aquarium.
Exactly. And so this one, the possum pipefish, hadn't been seen in the Gulf of Mexico since the early 70s, and they thought it was gone. And so the state of Alabama announced they were going to do a natural gas well in Grand Bay, which is our most pristine coastline, no development, grass beds, marsh, oysters everywhere, beautiful. And they were going to put a gas well on one of the little marshy islands. Be the first time they'd ever done that in Alabama, be the closest gas well to shore and everything. So I went there as a reporter to see the site and everything, and I start throwing my cast net. And I catch this big, weird pipefish. I'd never caught such a big pipefish. So I take a bunch of pictures. I show them to Dr. Bob Shipp, who you may know.
Right, sure.
And he confirms it's a possum pipefish. And he's like, this is a big deal. And so that little fish, the discovery of it, derailed the state plan to put a gas well in Grand Bay. Just this one fish. And it was such a little stroke of luck. I just happened to start throwing the cast net, just because I wanted to take pictures of what I caught and put them in the newspaper. And so that was a pretty neat moment.
That was a big story.
Yeah, it was. And it led to a number of people got fired at the state lands division and stuff because of there had been some underhanded dealings making this Colorado company's gas permit go through. So that was kind of, and then I found another creature. I was going to do a story about all the crawfish here. As I mentioned, we have more species than any other state. In fact, this is the global center of crawfish diversity, which is kind of a stunning thing. So I was going to go do a story about all the species I could catch in the Delta to eat. And I noticed there was one near my house that had only been seen one time in the 70s and never found again. And it was called the rusty gravedigger, a little bitty bright red, like lipstick crawfish. And Fish and Wildlife told me it was extinct, and they were going to put it on the list as something that was lost and everything. And I managed to catch one. And then I caught it in a creek that is the outfall for the City of Daphne sewer plant and a Home Depot parking lot and Interstate 10.
I know exactly where that is.
That's where it smells so bad. That's that's the only place it had ever been seen. And I went there, and after 3 weeks managed to catch one. So then these crawfish experts come down from Indiana and Iowa who are writing the Crayfishes of Alabama book for the state. I take them out there, and we catch 7 in one day. Then we start working our way down the bay. The first creek is in Daphne, and it had been destroyed by the city they bulldozed it for flood control. We didn't find any there, but we went down to the next creek and the next creek, and then we worked our way all the way to Florida, and we found this little crawfish in every one of the creeks. It had been in them all along, but the thing in Alabama is nobody's ever looked. And so we have all these creatures around us that have never been identified. You can find new species in Alabama. When I started writing that book, we had 350 species of fish. Now we have 450. We had 84 crawfish species. Now we have 97. So, E.O. Wilson, I was interviewing him one time. This is our most famous American scientist and from Alabama as well. And he said, if you think finding new species is exciting, come to Alabama. We find them all the time. And this is the most important scientific mind. He just died, but that was his attitude toward Alabama. And we're in this kind of burgeoning scientific moment where people are realizing, Alabama covered up in cotton fields is the most diverse place in America.
Golly, man. So is that red crawfish in here?
Yeah, there's a picture of him in there. He's toward the back he's in that section you're in now, I think. You see all the mud flowing in and stuff.
Yeah.
There's a little picture of him in there, I'm pretty sure, somewhere.
A delta dim. Do I keep going or go the other way?
Well, I'm not sure. He's in there somewhere. I think you're getting close to him.
I'll find it later, and you guys won't get to see it unless you buy the book. Okay.
But that's part of what's so exciting about doing the charters is taking people out there to see that stuff and, to understand. I mean, I've been all over the world. We have world-class wilderness here, in Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
And as you said, there he is right there. That's him.
Can you see that, Matthew?
That was the first one I caught. And it was funny. I took it to Fish and Wildlife to have them expert ID it. And they identify it and say, yeah, this is it. This is the first one seen since 1976. And then they reached for the formaldehyde jar. And I said, what are you doing? They said, well, we have to kill it to prove it exists. So I took it back. I said, if you're going to kill it, you got to go find your own. Because I'd already taken that one to my son's kindergarten. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and put him on the front page of the paper.
Right. Yeah, take you to kindergarten. Mr. Raines, how's the crawfish?
Yeah.
Well, the government killed him, Billy.
Exactly.
Oh, God. Oh, my gosh. What have you expected to see, but you haven't found yet? What is it? I mean, you got to have a serious hide and seek trait in you. Finding the Clotilda, finding species that were thought to be extinct. Is there something you've got in the back of your mind now? I'm gonna get this sucker. And
well, there are a lot of rumors about a ship with gold off the beach here in Orange Beach.
I'll help you look.
And an old man that I've heard wind of, I'll say, found a 7-foot gold chain offshore. He was a shrimper. And pirates used gold chains to carry their wealth, because you could have a chain links made of gold that you would wear around your waist, hidden under your clothes. And that was, all your worldly possessions. But nobody could steal them from you because they'd have to wake you up and they didn't know you had them. So the fact that he found this 7-foot gold chain out there is very suggestive that either a pirate fell overboard and died out there, or maybe there's a whole ship. So I would love to find a ship.
There's another guy who shall remain nameless, here in Orange Beach, that they were building a new house and uncovered and knocked a tree down, and down in the roots there was a lot of gold. And
but this is where the pirates were.
Yeah,
this is where we're on the Gulf of Mexico. This is where the action was.
Oh my gosh!
I would love to find a lot of gold buried under a tree. And
yeah, I know. I would too.
When I found the Clotilda, I took the head of the Vodun religion, which is
this is an
African
amazing
religion.
story here.
And it's the source of American voodoo and South American voodoo. That's an African religion called Vodun, and that was what the place where all the people on the Clotilda came from. That was the main religion. And so they still have a guy today who is basically the Pope of Voodoo. He describes himself that way. The Pope, he is the highest ranking official. So he came here and went up to the site to do a ceremony asking the ancestors of the people on the ship to forgive the people of his country for selling them. They were the people who captured and sold.
Yeah, explain that briefly about the tribe that did the dealings with white people. This tribe would catch these people.
Yeah, well, that's actually a hot topic in the news right now. So there's a tribe called the Dehomans, and the way to think of it is to take a state like Pennsylvania or Alabama, where they're the same size, and then take a major city in that state, like Birmingham, Alabama, or Mobile, or Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and the city in Birmingham, let's say, spent 300 years attacking everybody else who lived in the state and captured about 4 million people and sold them into slavery over the course of 300 years. So they're responsible, the Dehoman tribe is responsible for selling about a third of all people who were enslaved in world history.
God,
which is a stunning thing.
They had that woman tribe,
that's what that movie, the Woman King. So they had this elite warrior unit, the Amazons, of these women who, when they attacked a village, the men would wait outside, 50,000 soldiers of the walls of the village. The women would go over the walls and murder people in their sleep, in the streets, and they would kill everyone who was too young or too old to be enslaved. And then all the people they were trying to capture would run out the gates of the village and be captured by the men. Well, this new movie is out right now, The Woman King, with Viola Davis, and I have watched the movie. It is the most stunning and bizarre rewrite of history I have ever seen. In the movie, the Dehomans and these women are cast as the heroes, defending their tribe and protecting them from people trying to enslave them. But in reality, the Dehomans are one of the most wicked, evil empires in the history of the earth. So that movie, The Woman King, it's the equivalent of taking Hitler and making him the hero of a story about saving the Jewish race.
See, that makes me so mad. Did you see the Elvis movie?
Yes.
Okay, I thought that guy was incredible.
He really was a good Elvis.
But Polly and I came out of that movie and we were like, it was kind of sad. But why are we sad? We knew the story. He's 40-something years old and he gets hooked on drugs. He dies on the toilet. We're not surprised. But it was kind of sad. But the thing about that movie that bugged me is that there were 3 or 4 things that they put in there that did not happen or happened in a totally different way. And I thought, now my boys are going to think that's reality. The Dunkirk movie left out a major, major thing in that movie. And when people see the movie, they just think,
that becomes the history.
Yeah. That's some talks I've had with some editors about how history is actually made.
Oh, absolutely.
Where they go, well, we can't find this. And I'm like, okay.
Well, so back to the Vodun guy.
Yeah.
And you were asking me about finding things. So he does this ceremony on the boat, asking for forgiveness for selling all the people, for his tribe selling all the people. And then he turns to me and he does this. He puts a necklace around my neck and he tells me that I am a son of the sea. This guy's business card says he is the head of the Vodun religion, so the chief, voodoo practitioner on earth, and he's a labor negotiator and a lawyer. So it's a pretty good portfolio.
Yeah, that's wicked. Okay, yeah.
So he puts the necklace on me. He says, and it also says he's the king of seas and oceans, the Roi de Mer. So he's got a lot of titles. And he tells me, you are now son of the sea, and you're going to be protected on the water. He says you're going to be protected on land if someone points a gun at you, because people are going to be very mad you found this ship. The gun won't work. And so I thought, cool, excellent. And then he says, and you're going to find something else, something even more valuable and important than the Clotilda, and you don't have to look for it. So ever since, I've been not looking for whatever I'm going to find next.
Not looking for gold.
Right.
Yeah. Sheesh. Then there's the story that I want you to just relate, if you don't mind, about you couldn't get the Mayer family to do anything. And then you get a call from other side of the country, the guy who's great-grandson of the captain, and then the great-grandsons. So just put that together.
So the Mayer family still lives locally, the people who paid for this, for the Clotilda's trip. We have a state park named after one of the brothers that brought the people in illegally. And so they have refused to have any communication with the Descendants in Africa Town, basically for decades, and never have refused to talk about the Clotilda. The same family in the late 60s they had built 500 houses in Africa Town, in the town that the enslaved Clotilda people started, and rented them to people. And then in the 60s, they tore them all down. And the then patriarch of the family said he was doing it to protest the city of Mobile finally giving water and sewer service to Africa Town. So they tore down 500 houses and basically ripped the community apart. You take out 500 families, in a community of 10,000 people, you're taking out thousands of people. And it wrecked the schools and everything. So that's the Mayer family. They tore those houses down, have never rebuilt them.
Because Mobile put sewer and water in, they tore down the houses.
Yes. They said
didn't want them living that way.
They said that the guy said in a newspaper interview that they've lived perfectly fine and healthy without water for all these years. They don't need it. If you give them a bathtub, they won't know what it's for. They'll probably store food in it. And that's what he said in his article. So the people in Africa Town, the Descendants, have really wanted to have like a reconciliation with the Mayer family. And,
but they won't have anything to do with it.
Right. Okay. But, it can be very powerful to forgive someone who's wronged you.
Yeah.
And for both sides of the equation. And that's what they want. They want to have this moment where the Mayers say, we're sorry that our ancestors did that, and they want to be able to say, it's okay, we forgive you. But they've been denied that all these years. So the guy you're talking about is a descendant of Captain Foster, who Timothy Mayer hired to sail the ship to Africa. And when I was before I wrote the book, I wrote a newspaper article about finding the first ship, the wrong ship, which wasn't the Clotilda. And that article went viral all over the world.
The global goof.
Yes, good name for it. But out of the article came an email from this guy you're talking about, who's a retired Air Force vet, fought in Vietnam. And he says, I'm ashamed to admit that my ancestor was Captain Foster. I'm so embarrassed that my family had a role in this. I'm sorry you didn't find the ship. I hope you find it. And so I called the guy immediately and was like, hey, look, will you come here and meet with the Descendants? They're dying to meet with somebody associated with the enslaver side of this. And he said he would. And he came, and he was actually terrified. He took his wedding ring off. He told me he wasn't going to mention his wife or his daughters because he didn't want them someone to want to harm them, to get back at him. He was afraid that people were going to come after him for what his ancestor did 160 years ago. And I told him that's not what's going to happen. He's like, they're going to yell at me. And we're sitting in my truck outside the place he's about to go in and meet him. And I said, no, they're going to hug you. And he's like, I can't believe that. But that's what happened. They hugged him. he cried, they cried, and then we took him to this event with 400 people, Descendants. And he spent the whole time getting hugged, and he described it as the most powerful day of his life other than the birth of his kids and the day he married his wife.
And then you took him and two of the grandsons of the Descendants. Explain
So
that.
actually the day after the event I was just talking about, I met at the event the great-great-grandson of Cujo Lewis, who is the most famous of the Clotilda passengers.
Right.
And they wrote there was a book that came out called Barracoon that was an interview with him about his entire life story.
Isn't that his chimney?
No, but he made the bricks.
Yeah, okay.
That chimney, that's his next-door neighbor's chimney.
Okay.
And so that chimney belonged to a guy named Peter Lee, Gumpa, whose life story is just total pathos. He was a member of the Dehoman royal court. And when Foster was paying for the 110 people he was buying, the king of Dahomey said, I can tell you're a wise man, and this is a good transaction. Pick anybody in this room, and they'll be your personal slave. Meaning all of his family members and royal court members in the royal court. They're in the throne room. And so Captain Foster points at the tallest one, who's this guy, Peter Lee. And Peter Lee, or Gumpa was his name, is then taken from his position as a member of the royal court away from his family and enslaved with all of the captives from their war making. And that's his chimney, you see. And he would describe his life story, until he died. He would say, well, my people sold me and your people bought me. And that was how he summed up his life. But Cujo and his sons made the bricks. All of the Africans, when they got here, they stuck together and they fought back. And they were a unit because
They didn't speak English.
No, they didn't. But they couldn't sell them through the slave markets because they were obviously African, because they didn't speak English. And they had tattoos and scarifications and stuff. So they were all kept together. So they'd been trained as warriors. And these were 19 to 30-year-old men and women. And so they fought back repeatedly against the mayors when they were physically fought them and stuff while they were enslaved. And so then when they were freed, they took turns building each other's houses. They saved up money together, and then they bought some land, and they built houses for everybody in the group, and they built a school. It's really an amazing story. The school they built is still there in Africa Town, still teaching kids. It was the first high school for African-American people in the state of Alabama, started by these Africans. It's kind of amazing.
And so you took the grandson of the captain
right.
and the two, and
so
tell about that.
we went up the river. We were talking, and I said to him, I was like, well, do you want to go up the river to Cujo Lewis's great-great-grandson? And he said, yeah. And I said to Captain Foster's descendant, do you want to go? And he said, yeah. And we took another descendant, and we got up there. And you got to drive up the river and everything. And this is actually captured in a new movie called Descendant, this moment, that's up for an Oscar as the best documentary.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And I'm in this scene and everything. We're on the boat, and I just realized while we were there, we're drifting over the Clotilda. And I said, guys, this is the first time a Foster, a Lewis, and an Allen have been at this spot since the night the Clotilda was burned. And it was, they all cried and hugged, and it was this powerful moment where, this man's ancestors bought their ancestors and pulled them all the way across the ocean, changing all their lives. And it was, a really powerful moment. In the film, the Descendant movie that's out, you can see it on Netflix now. You hear Captain Foster's descendant saying, well, from everything I've read, Cujo said that my ancestor was a good man. And so that makes me feel good that he wasn't mean to him. And an African-American guy who's on the boat, not a descendant, but he says, well, they're all, slave dealers are slave dealers. There's no good slave dealers in my book. And it was this tense moment of, well, of course, there weren't good slave dealers,
right.
As far as in the grand scheme of things. But that's a very powerful film. I encourage people to watch as well.
The Descendant.
It's called Descendant.
Yeah. Descendant.
And it's on Netflix. It was made by a woman from Mobile originally named Margaret Brown. And the film is very powerful. And you meet the descendant community. And you see the ship, some of the archaeological work and stuff like that. But mostly it's about those people's position as this group who know, for enslaved people, or the descendants of people who were enslaved in America, their history, if they're lucky, goes back to the plantation their ancestors were on. But if they're that lucky and they have that much of their family history, that's all there is. They can go back 150 years. There's no more. Whereas, my family, I've been able to trace back to the 1500s in England and stuff through all this ancestry. So for the Clotilda, the people whose ancestors were on it, they know more. They know there's work has been done to where we know the individual villages these people were living in when they were captured.
And you went there.
I went there, yeah, absolutely, to the places. And it is a present wound there in the African countries. There are still tribal resentments between the tribes that captured everyone, the Dehomans, and then all the tribes they captured that are festering, and they worry are going to start wars today based on these generational hurts that go back. So, that was one of here in America, we're talking about reparations and whether the descendants of enslaved people should get some sort of, recompense from the government. And they're doing the same thing in Africa. And it's just fascinating, because on both sides, there were people whose lives were stolen from for the financial gain of other people.
All right. Excuse me. I want to talk to you guys here just for a minute. And I want to tell you, I wanted you to hear these stories and hear how some of them ended up, because I want to tell you why you want to get the last slave ship, why you want to get 2 or 3 of them, why you need to make sure your principal reads it, make sure your pastor reads it, because you and I have read books that we thought were like this before. Okay, they talked about capturing the slaves and taking them across the ocean, how awful it was, and then on the plantation. And up until this book, every one of those books has kind of ended with the attitude of, now, see why we're mad? See? Do you understand why we're mad now? Shouldn't you be mad about this too? Can we all be mad together? And it'll leave you with kind of an unsettled feeling. But when I read The Last Slave Ship, the thing that hit me was this book ends with massive hope. As horrible as that was, the only thing that's going to solve a huge bunch of our problems is forgiveness. That's the only, that's because, I mean, if you're going to be mad at me about something my great-great-granddaddy did 150 years ago, I guess you're just going to have to be mad, because what am I going to do about it? And so that forgiveness, the idea that you don't have to forgive somebody, they don't have to deserve it. They don't have to ask for it. They don't even have to know it's happening. But the last slave ship, it is such a hopeful ending with a recipe for what we're supposed to do. And so you nailed that book. That book was divinely guided, because it's more than just a story. So, and I appreciate you coming and talking with us again. I want, I would love for you to be just like a regular guest here. You come every couple of months and
get me a little sidekick chair, and I'll sit next to you and chime in.
But I mean, all this stuff, the animals, the water, all this stuff. There's so many shows we could do because I'm just fascinated by this, and I feel like if I am, they are. So anyway, thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me.
For being here.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll put on the show notes how to book you as a guide, sure. and make sure you know the names of these books and where to get these books. And so thank you again, buddy.
Thank you so much.
All right, man. I'm Andy Andrews, the professional noticer, harnessing common sense and wisdom to plow through challenges all the way to an answer for you. And I think that'll do it for this week. Get us out of here, Matthew. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to the boys and girls who aspire to become ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of another episode of The Professional Noticer. In a world where common sense has become a superpower, I'm harnessing that tiny bit of mental energy I have for you, seeking wisdom, making observations, and endeavoring to answer tough questions in a way that will empower your family and your business. I'm Andy Andrews. Until next week, goodbye. This episode of The Professional Noticer was produced by Matt Limpert. The Noticer theme written and performed by Sugarcane Jane. Catnip fondue for the cast and crew provided by Twinkle and Smoke of Beverly Hills. Additional funding provided by iconspouse.org, a counseling ministry dedicated to improving the lives of those patient and loyal men and women who are married to an icon. Not only do we counsel, sometimes we intervene. Self-image is a huge problem for these poor, forgotten souls, and we can help. Won't you join today and make a donation? Perhaps you'd like to volunteer. These spouses of icons are living lonely lives. Think about it. When was the last time you saw Mr. Butterworth? A long time, right? It's because he allows his wife to bask in the spotlight. The same can be said of Aunt Sam. She is a selfless woman and so proud to play a behind-the-scenes role so that her husband, Uncle Sam, can travel all over America, point his finger at people and say, I want you. Obviously, there are many others caught up in these sad circumstances. In fact, they've been out of sight so long, many of us have forgotten they existed in the first place. There is, of course, Mother Time and Father Nature. How long has it been since you've seen Uncle Jemima? And I'm sure you remember the Happy Reaper. She's stuck in a loveless marriage with a husband who is constantly, well, grim. Old Lady Winter is inside alone every day watching the window, just hoping to catch a glimpse of her husband. Occasionally, she and her best friend, Old Woman River, will connect, but that's it. Folks, the special people we listed here are just the tip of the iceberg. Won't you help? iconspouse.org. Log in now.